second Community Sector Roundtable. It's great to see so many faces joining us again today for a chat. I want to once again extend my appreciation for everyone finding the time to come together to have these important conversations when I know you've all got very busy schedules, so thank you. On a personal note, I hope everyone has managed to find a sense of normalcy through these testing times. As we begin to hear talk of restrictions perhaps lifting, I know we're still some way quite off a way of having business as usual, and suspect the effects of this pandemic will be felt for a while to come. I'll just flag the technology again, how we're using it and how you can use it today. So please note we will again be recording today's session, so we're able to share your insights across our teams to inform their work. We'll also be writing up the key themes from today's discussion to share externally again. Jess and Kat will be helping facilitate today's meeting. If you've got any questions or observations while someone else is talking, please type them in your Zoom group chat function on the right-hand side, and they'll make sure it gets shared with the group. Please keep your microphone muted if possible when you're not speaking to avoid any feedback and background noise. And it looks like many people have got their video screens on, which is great, so I can see all your faces, so thank you. So we're still trying to understand the full impact of the coronavirus pandemic as it unfolds, and the short-term impacts on consumers is beginning to come to light, and shortly we'll update you on how we are going about collecting data at this pivotal time. Before those updates, I want to reiterate the Commission's commitment to continuing to monitor the environment, to hear directly from consumers, consumer and business organisations and the community sector, so that we can continue to understand the situation as it unfolds. Today's roundtable will be a little different from the first one. We will still be listening to you, of course. The primary purpose of our meeting is to hear from you directly about what you're seeing consumers experiencing on the ground. However, we also want to start using this roundtable to update you on what's been happening at the Commission and to invite your participation in some deep dive conversations about critical issues as they emerge. So just in terms of the agenda today, I think that you've been sent that prior to this morning, is that right, Kat and Jess? Yep, so you've got an idea of what we'll cover. So in a minute, I'll just give a 5 or 10 minute update on reflections from the last Community Sector Roundtable and our recent Energy Sector Roundtable as well. I'll just give a quick update too on the Commission's work since the last time we've met. Part 3 of today will be an update from you on issues or trends since our last roundtable. There was a number of questions we posed in that agenda, and I think you've had those prior to this morning, is that right? Jess and Kat? Yep. So maybe I will, I might read those out now just to get your, to provoke your thoughts on that, and then I won't repeat them again later and we can share them again, but some questions we would like to pose and get you an update from you all on, and plus anything else you'd like to cover. So at the last roundtable we heard complaint calls to EWOB and calls to support services were down. Has there been any change since then? Are you seeing customers having difficulty in engaging or accessing assistance from their energy providers? What does that look like? Have you heard any good examples of retailers providing support? Have you seen any change in the delayed approval of ERGS applications as mentioned at the last roundtable? And are you seeing any change in practices from water businesses or local government for customers who are experiencing payment difficulty? And then part 4 of today's agenda, we wanted to have a deep dive on disconnections. So at the last roundtable, participants raised the issue that consumers were still being disconnected, and we'd like to explore that in a little bit more detail to understand what's happening on the ground from your perspective. And then we'll wrap up and close, so a bit to cover in the next hour and a half. I'll just quickly go through the attendees from today and welcome everybody. From the community sector, I've got Cynthia Gabert and Zach Gillam from EWOB, welcome. Lauren Solomon and Emma O'Neill from the CPRC, David Bryant from the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, Gavin Duffy from St Vincent de Paul, Brooke McHale from VCOS, Gabby Sundstrom from Thriving Communities Partnership, Joe Brody and Jake Lilly from COUT, Sandy Ross and Lynn Dundon from Financial Counselling Victoria, Carolyn Bond from Economic Abuse Reference Group, Kate Meacham from Domestic Violence Victoria, and Jill Wilson from the Community Information and Support Victoria. We've also got a few observers as well from the AER, DELP, DTF and the HHS. And I'm also joined today by my fellow commissioners, Simon Gordon, Sitesh Bajani and Rebecca Billings, our CEO, John Hamill, members of our executive team, Marcus Crudden, Sarah McDowell and Michelle Bryan, Jess and Kat, our leads on vulnerability policy research and engagement, and their manager, Lucy Weston, Lisa Horsberg and Clayton Bennett from our communications team, Kat Harris and Anne Reynolds from our energy team, and Mayumi, our intern, who is supporting the vulnerability team. So welcome everyone. So let's move to part one. So I'm just going to provide a recap of what we heard at the first roundtable. The key insights we gathered from the first roundtable included calls to support services are down, but this is only temporary. Different types of vulnerability are emerging, and communication is key to supporting customers. I'm sorry if you can hear my children in the background. The doors are closed, but I think I'm hearing lots of laughter and giggling. I'm sorry, I probably can't stop that. Consumers are still being disconnected and the payment difficulty framework is not always being applied as it should be. Delays in the release of ERGs is creating considerable difficulty for consumers, and we should be focusing on consumer welfare and wellbeing, especially coming into winter. Small businesses can't be overlooked when talking about consumer welfare. The coronavirus pandemic will also have gendered impacts, and that sharing information is crucial to achieving outcomes for consumers throughout this time. We've also held a roundtable with the energy sector last week on the 22nd of April. And energy businesses told us that there's been an increase in customers seeking payment difficulty assistance, both residential and business, and predictions that this will increase significantly over the coming months. Energy businesses are adapting to working from home and in the field and are concerned about the wellbeing of their staff. Energy businesses were also concerned about the extra challenges around implementing regulatory reforms at this time. They've also increased communication with customers about payment difficulty assistance, planned outages and energy efficiency. Retailers also emphasised the importance of sharing bad debt burdens across the entire energy supply chain. So that's what we heard last week. Moving to part two of today's agenda, I just wanted to recap on what the Commission's also been doing. So since that first roundtable, when we heard from you, the Commission's been very busy to provide protections for Victorian consumers in our regulated sectors. And briefly, what this has includes you would have seen the joint effort launched by the AER and the Commission to collect some real-time data to rigorously monitor the ability for energy customers to pay their energy bills in light of the effect of the pandemic. And Sarah will say more on that shortly, including in relation to our audit program and a pulse check. At the last roundtable, Commissioner Bajani also asked whether organisations may be able to assist the Commission in gathering evidence for potential enforcement matters, given them your direct contact with consumers, particularly those experiencing vulnerability. And there was certainly willingness, I think, at our last roundtable for some organisations to do that. So we would like to circulate a template to support the gathering of that information and material that might assist us in our role. The Commission, we've gone some way to developing that template. There's a little bit more work to do, but I just wanted to update you on the fact that that's in development, and we hope that that will be ready for circulation by the next roundtable, if not before. So we're certainly working on that as well. I'd like to just touch on too, the It's Your Energy communication campaign has been running again as well, promoting information about the payment difficulties framework. We've also had survey results which show the people who need payment difficulties support the most, those who are struggling to make ends meet, are less likely to know about it or believe they will get a positive result if they do in fact call their retailer. And as we discussed at the last roundtable, there's more work to be done to build that trust in the energy sector. We've also communicated with water businesses, indicating our expectation they may need to go beyond minimum requirements for consumer protection at this time. It's been busy, but everybody has been in this interesting time. So on that note there, I might just hand over to Sarah. Sarah, would you like to just touch on a little bit more of the detail about that data collection program, what we've done in audit and any other reflections you got?
Thank you, Kate, and good afternoon, everybody. Look, I'll give you an update on 3 areas of our work program, and just generally, essentially, the work program of the Energy Division has been completely transformed as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. But firstly, I'll speak on the intelligence work program that we have in place. Critical for us to be able to deliver on the National Cabinet's utility principles, our objectives in the Act, and more broadly to respond to vulnerability in our community. What's really critical for us is to understand actually what is happening. And so there's a couple of elements to our information gathering work program. One has been obtaining, in conjunction with the AER, data from retailers in relation to a couple of areas. That includes disconnection, debt levels, as well as access to the retail, and primarily we're receiving data in relation to call centres, so how long are customers waiting to access a retailer. And we're also seeking information from retailers to understand what else they're doing to support customers at this time. So that data request went out about a week or so ago. That data is due on Monday. Now, from Monday, we are requesting data to be provided on either a daily or weekly basis. And that will include daily data on disconnections for non-payment. And so once we get that data, we intend not only to advise commissioners and government, but certainly report that in a public way. So everybody sitting around this virtual roundtable today will get access to that information. The second component is receiving data from distributors. We have received data from distributors as a result of an ad hoc request in relation to disconnection requests. However, we do propose to obtain that data on a regular basis, and so that we are scheduled to issue that data request to distributors either tomorrow or Monday. And thirdly, another critical element of our intelligence gathering work program are these tables, are these round tables. The information that we've been able to so far receive from your reflections for the previous roundtable, as well as the industry roundtable, has been really critical for us in terms of being able to shape our responses and work programs. The second big sort of change has been our shift in priorities for our compliance program. And a key focus now in relation to our compliance work program is vulnerability. And the 2 critical components which for us relate to vulnerability in our regulatory framework include the payment difficulty framework and our family violence framework. So what we propose to do, and as already signalled last week, is tomorrow we will issue what we're describing as a pulse check, or a more targeted audit. And this pulse check would be issued, will be issued to all retailers participating in Victoria. And we'll be seeking, of course, responses from retailers to understand how set up they are to support customers at this time. And we'll be looking at primary documents from those retailers. We will ask for that data by the 20th of May. And we'll be able to publicly report on what we're observing from that information as well. Look, and the third component is our reform work program. There's not too much to say in relation to reform at this stage. What's critical for us is to understand what is happening to customers at this time, to understand what is the customer experience and how are retailers and distributors engaging in the market and with customers at this time. But we are cognizant that there is a gap, particularly for small businesses at the moment. Small businesses can't access protections under our payment difficulty framework. So we're actively looking at what kind of protections may be needed to support small business at this time. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Sarah. We'll move to the next part of our agenda now, part 3. And this is your opportunity to give us an update again today. So at the roundtable 3 weeks ago, each organisation provided an update on what you were seeing from your perspective. We'd like to give you the opportunity to do the same again, noting that many things may be similar or there may be other emerging issues you'd like to raise. And I've prompted some questions there that we'd be interested in hearing on, but please feel free to cover whatever you would like to, perhaps in a sort of a 1 to 2 minute, I know it doesn't seem very long, but a snapshot or update from your organisation would be very much appreciated. I think we might move to a representative from EWOV first, if that's all right. Zach, I could see you there. I'm not sure whether Cynthia's on the line either, but I'll just leave it to you to give us an update of what you'd like to let us know.
Yeah, sure. It is just me today. Cynthia sends her apologies. Look, really briefly, really not much change since the last meeting we had, in that all numbers and caseloads are low. In fact, if anything, they're even lower than last time we spoke. So again, it feels counterintuitive, but I feel it's still that calm before the storm moment for us, and we're certainly anticipating an increase. We're just not sure when it's going to hit. But the point that Sarah made about the lack of protection for small business, given the low numbers overall, we can't draw any real conclusions about major issue trends, but we have had a few case studies come through about small businesses struggling and having difficulty engaging with their retailers and getting any form of assistance or help. So that certainly is an area to watch.
Great, thanks very much, Zach, for a useful update. We might move to the Consumer Policy Research Centre. I think we've got both Lauren Solomon and Emma O'Neill on the line, so I'll hand over to you for an update.
Thanks, Kate. So from our end, we'll just keep it brief. Our COVID research project will go into field next week, so trying to collect data both Victorian-wide and nationwide about consumer experiences of COVID, and particularly what sort of supports they're accessing at this time or attempting to access. That's one thing we want to capture, the attempts to access and any barriers associated with accessing support. Emma, did you want to briefly touch on the vulnerability aspect of the research you're doing?
Yeah, thanks Lauren. What we are to do as part of this survey is capture some of the more unique demographic elements of the COVID response. So as far as possible, we'll be trying to tease out what people who are receiving the JobKeeper payment through their employer, how they're going. Likewise, the boosted job seeker or temporarily boosted job seeker payment. And just looking at those sort of emerging forms of vulnerability.
Yeah. And then just the other thing, we've got 2 new community leaders that have come on board for the Iraqi-born Arabic-speaking community and Vietnamese communities. So the outreach for Energy Simplified will begin very shortly to those communities, and there'll be some webinars and online support forums for the Energy Simplified program in the AusNet region also.
Great, thanks very much, Lauren and Emma. David from Brotherhood of St Lawrence. David, are you there today?
I am, and Damien sends his apologies as well. He's at another meeting, I think. We don't have a lot of updated information on those specific questions since last time, but I'll highlight a couple of things we've done. We signed a letter to Minister Donnellan about ERGs with some other people who are probably on this call, recommending that the backlog be cleared, among other things. We are still concerned about people's energy consumption having gone up. We've been getting consumption trackers from Gemini that show that it's still up about 20% compared to last year for households, which excludes gas, obviously, and excludes people who are under consuming or under heating. And we anticipate that that'll probably get worse as it gets colder. And we're looking into options for what we could do to help.
Great, thanks, David. All right, we'll move to Gavin Dufty. Are you there today, Gavin, from St Vincent de Paul?
I certainly am when I can unmute myself. Just similar to Zach and EWOB, if anything, we're down a little bit again on the numbers. They were down significantly, and there seems to be another tick down a little bit more. what was the second question? Because the volumes are down, we're not seeing much in engagement at all. The people that are presenting themselves at a greater rate are the people with zero income. So overseas students, migrant refugees, people on waiting for work cover, and a few of those things that, you know, high cost, high complicated things. So they're still there. With ERGs, no improvement, but I'm sure others will be able to give more detail on that. And with regards to councils and water companies, we, again, because our volumes are so low from a household or a domestic customer perspective, not really much to say, but from our organisational perspective, with our retail outlets, people, those two, and landlords, those three groups have actually been quite receptive to bill deferrals, rate deferrals, and those things that we've been reaching out to. So on a company, from a business side, that's been quite encouraging for us.
Great, thanks for the update, Gavin. Brooke from VCOS. Brooke, are you there?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Also don't have much to add on those questions there, and particularly because we're not a direct service provider, but just a few kind of broader reflections and building on what Zach said and others in terms of demand and number of calls being down. It's something we're observing in quite a few different parts of the community sector in terms of need for assistance, and it's probably been a little bit of a surprise. We're doing some thinking about what the reasons for that, and why we're not probably seeing the surges that we expected. And I suspect Kate from Domestic Violence Victoria might have some reflections on it as well. I suppose one of the things that we think is that people are, observing the rules, I guess, worried that others have a greater need than they do, and are sort of sitting on issues that they might perhaps, that they will need assistance with. So we are expecting that at some point that's surge in demand will come. So it's something that we need to be prepared for, I guess, over the coming months. Couple of other things, and I also don't want to steal Kate from CISVIC's thunder, but one of the areas that we are seeing significant increased demand for is around emergency relief. And we've got a survey kind of out in the field that we and CISVIC and others have helped DHHS design to get a sense of what the demand for emergency relief, with a particular focus on food relief, is. But I think there could be some findings in that may be of interest to this kind of broader group about who kind of new emerging demand for emergency relief, and that's both people who are sort of in quarantine and isolating, but also more generally people who perhaps didn't need that kind of assistance in the past and might now as a result of the pandemic. The other one that just might be of interest is that one of our primary focus has been on resolving the rental situation. We know that issue around paying of rent has kind of been a number one priority for many people. The legislation has now gone through for the eviction prevention program and for setting up kind of a mechanism for resolving issues and rent resolutions between tenants and landlords. So once some of those kind of processes start moving through, we may then see people turning to other payment areas, and that could be one thing that will impact on demand. So just a few kind of broader reflections from the sector.
Thanks very much, Brooke. I'm not sure whether Gabby from Thriving Communities Partnership has been able to join us today. Gabby, are you there at all? I have a feeling maybe not, so we'll move on, and Gabby, later if you do join us, maybe Jess or Kate will just give me a heads up. Gerard and Jake from Consumer Action Law Centre.
Thanks, Kate. Unlike others, we've had a large increase in callers to the National Debt Helpline, sort of a 60 to 80% increase. And the reason for that has been the Department of Health and Human Services sent a letter last week to everyone that's got a pending ERG application. And the letter was designed to let people know that there's obviously a delay to be processing, and to tell them not worry, and that their ERG would be processed. And it also said that if they've got any debt issues, to call the National Debt Helpline. Now, the letter was actually a reasonably clear letter, I thought, but I think it was a lesson in the levels of literacy in the community, because people didn't understand it. And we have been overloaded with calls because our number was on there and DHHS's number was not on there. So people were calling us about this letter that they received and they couldn't understand, or they didn't know what it was about. And they weren't really looking for financial counselling, so probably not very effective referrals to our service. All we really did is refer them back to DHHS. And so we've raised that issue with the Minister for Community Services. And as David said before, there's been a subsequent letter coordinated by FC Victoria to the Minister as well. We'd just like to see those payments being paid rather than keep people waiting. And we're just, this week it's continuing to overload our service, and means we can't get to other people that are calling as well. So it's causing quite a few problems for us. More broadly, in terms of other calls, it's the same sorts of issues we talked about last time. Like someone else on the call, I think we're receiving more calls from people who have no income whatsoever. So those groups of migrant workers and students, and people who have just, lost hours and jobs, and trying to understand what their rights are.
Thanks, Jared. Just on the ERGs issue too, I won't put Gordon on the spot, but we've got Gordon Karras from DHHS, who I understand leads the work on the concessions and ERGs programs at DHHS. So all of your comments are being heard by Gordon. And Gordon, I will give you an opportunity to talk if you'd like to, but obviously won't put you on the spot to respond if you don't feel like you can. I might come back at the end and maybe give you a chance just to think about that, Gordon, and come back to you later if that's okay.
Okay, Kate, I just also say on the point around rates at the end, we have had some indication that the councils have been deferring rates for up to 12 months. So that's what we've been told. At least some people have had that experience.
Yes, okay. Well, that's positive. Yeah, good. Thanks, Jared. Sandy and Lynn from Financial Counselling Victoria. Sandy or Lynn, are you there?
Yep, I'm here, and I think Lynn's on the line as well, Kate. Thank you. And yeah, the ERGs has probably been the major thing that we've been involved with and working on, and I think it's. I mean, obviously we've written to the Minister as part of a group of agencies and organisations that are on this hookup, advocating for some ministerial sort of interventions into kind of the settings in which the department's trying to manage the ERGs situation. And it's great that Gordon's on the line, and I had a good conversation with him the other day, and I think he's got some things to probably advise about what the department's been doing, and they're certainly, I think, working very hard to try and reduce the backlog. I think from our perspective, there is a need to kind of, I think, adjust at the political level the policy settings to enable a more rapid clearance of the backlog, because I think they're within the framework that the department's having to operate at the moment, it's really not going to clear until the end of June. And I think that's way too long. To give a picture of the dimensions of the problem, the letter that Jared referred to, we understand, was sent out to 56,000 Victorians. We're talking about a very, very large number of people who are seeking relief from utility bills, and it's a scary, the size of that problem. We also have evidence that there are applications that date back to August and September that are in that backlog. So we're talking about quite lengthy delays, more like 7 or 8 months than 3 months. The other thing that just to mention that's come in feedback from our members is some comments that some major retailers, Origin and AGL, being less than helpful for customers who want or need to access Centre Pay as a payment method. And we think retailers should be in a position to assist customers fairly actively with setting up Centre Pay. And what's happening is there's a kind of referral back to Centrelink, which is just not very helpful for consumers who are seeking access to Centre Pay as a payment method. That's all from me.
Great, thanks very much, Sandy.
Sorry, Kate, can I just clarify with Sandy, those retailers were AGL and Origin?
Yep.
Yep, thank you.
Lynn, did you want to add anything to that, or are you happy for me to move on?
Just the last question around local government. So there's not a uniform practice around the deferment of rates. So if we can have some advice from you for local government, because our financial counsellors, for example, Melton has been, I mean, we've written a submission around rates, but we'd like some advice from you that we could share with our members.
Thank you, Lynn. We've also got
Hi, everyone. Can anyone else hear me on the call? I think we might have some technical issues.
I think we all can't hear, Jess.
Yeah.
We can hear you, Jess.
It's frozen, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hear you, Jess.
You can hear me. Okay,
I
that's
can hear
good.
you. I just thought it was me.
Yeah, we've just had a little moment where we all went, is that just my computer?
Yes.
Look, we might just see if we can get Kate back on the line.
I think I'm back now.
Oh, there we go.
I've gone and come back. It would help me if the questions got taken down. I can see everybody's screen at once, actually, so I can just get a feel for. There we go. Thank you. That just helps me. It wasn't just me that left the group, or was it everybody?
It was just you.
I must have been talking too much. All right, I'm back. I was just about to flick to Carolyn Bond from the Economic Abuse Reference Group. Carolyn, are you there?
I am. Look, I can't add much to others. You know, look, our members are saying the same sort of things. Some are getting an increase in calls, some are getting a decrease. I think at some stage it'd be great to have some sort of analysis of all of the change of the calls and the types of calls that are coming to different agencies. Probably one thing that comes out is it appears that things that are urgent, and by that I mean like, you know, urgent as in urgent today, people are probably making contact, and things that aren't urgent today, they're not. But look, apart from that, I'm just interested to hear what other people are seeing. But I think it might be a while before we really can get a full picture about what's happening.
Great, so thank you, Carolyn. Kate from Domestic Violence Victoria. Kate, are you there? Okay.
Yes, I am. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, our member services, like VCOS, we don't do any direct service delivery, but we have been speaking to our members who do family violence service delivery, and the data so far has been varied. Some services have seen an increase in requests for support, and others have seen a decrease. Not entirely sure about why that is, but suspecting it may have something to do with the local police response, or maybe different demographics in different areas. The statewide crisis service Safe Steps had been reporting a decrease in calls coming through, particularly amongst high-risk clients, which is particularly concerning because we're assuming that those victim survivors can't actually call for support when they would have before. Recently, they've said that they are starting to experience rates similar to pre-COVID, and we're expecting that to continue to increase as time goes on, and particularly a surge once the sort of self-isolation rules are lifted. We've also been hearing reports from other community services like alcohol and drug and mental health services that their clients are presenting with increased disclosures of family violence. So we're starting to think how we can partner and leverage points of contact in the community where victim survivors may still be able to go, and utility companies are one of those points, similar to any kind of financial institution. Should a victim survivor be experiencing financial hardship and be allowed to contact that service, how we might work with those providers to do some initial screening for family violence and think how we could link them into support. We're also thinking about how we might be able to work with supermarkets, chemists, childcare centres, those sorts of areas that it might be safer for victim survivors to go. Other things, yeah, I guess really just concerns that perpetrators are actively telling victim survivors that family violence services aren't open, that they're not available, that they can't, there's nowhere for them to go. So really trying to get the message out there that we are open, we are taking referrals, and yeah, that's probably the main message. So probably not too much compared to everyone else. Expecting the surge to come later, unfortunately.
Thank you, Kate. Was I the only one that left the meeting, came back in at the first part of Kate's speech? Yep, I must have frozen again. I hope my connection keeps up with the rest of yours. This is very unusual. Anyway, bear with me. If I'm frozen, you know I've left and trying to get back in. Jill Wilson from Community Information and Support Victoria. Jill, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Jill.
So we're hearing from our members, I guess like a lot of others, we were quiet, but now we're really picking up around emergency relief and accessing support. We are hearing that a lot of people have spent that first 750 stimulus on energy and energy bills and also rent. So maybe they're not accessing support around that because they did have that additional money. I'm not sure, but certainly a lot of them are saying that. There's still, agencies are saying barriers to accessing ERGs, particularly around technology and clients not having technology, or also CALD clients and them being able to access language services. That's been a real barrier. We've also, I guess, found challenges around us advocating and continuing to advocate for clients now that we're all on phone and trying to navigate that. So yeah, that's put a bit of a challenge up for us. And I guess like others, we're just waiting, yeah, for the onslaught, basically.
Thanks, Jill. Those were very interesting reflections from the group. Thank you for sharing those with us. Gordon, can you hear me? I'm not sure whether you're most welcome to suggest that you'll take this up elsewhere, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to respond at all or provide some reflections from an ERG's perspective. Can you hear me, Gordon?
Yes, I can, Kate, and thank you. I'm quite happy to give some responses now and also to follow up. We'll continue to follow up with some information about what's happening with ERGs. Could I go to Morris's observation? And Morris, just after you spoke before, I had another look at the letter, and I think you're quite right. It's technically correct, but not particularly helpful. We did get a few suggestions from a number of members of this group on suitable inclusions, exclusions. We took a suggestion on, I'm not sure from where, to include the national number. Normal practice is when you're actually including someone else's number in a letter, you actually check with them. That wasn't done, and for that I apologise. The second thing that you've observed that's clearly, not everyone's seen this letter, apologies, is that it doesn't actually have the concessions phone number on it. It has the concessions email address, and that is because at that time we didn't have people manning that number or looking after that number because we'd actually all been booted out of the office. We've since now got a remote telephony mechanism in place, so the ERG's concessions number is now actually being answered. So partly timing and also partly poor planning in terms of the text of that letter. And for that, we do apologise. We are getting some referrals back from the national line, back to the concessions information line, and we're taking those as quickly as we can. But to the broader issue of the ERG's backlog, talking with Sandy earlier this week, the backlog got up to, I think it was 60,000. As of yesterday, we're down to 55. We are clearing nearly 1,000 a day. Our target is to get up to 1,200 a day, such that we've cleared them by the end of June. The oldest on hand is now the 7th of November. I get that data daily, so it sort of sticks in my mind. Just in case it's not clear what else was done, and the reason for that letter that was sent was to advise those applicants whose applications are still pending that it is still pending. However, the energy retailer or the utility retailer is, didn't put it in these words, but obliged not to disconnect them, and also not obliged not to initiate debt recovery action. We also wrote to the retailers at the same time and reminded them of that obligation. In addition, we have made a, let's call it a prepayment or a payment in recognition of what they are likely to receive for the outstanding applications, as well as the applications for concessions through to the end of June. Many of the retailers have contacted us to acknowledge that, to thank us for it, and to confirm that they will not be proceeding with debt recovery or disconnection activity for any consumer that has an outstanding ERGS application. Some of them have actually gone further than that in relation to their commitments to the community, but that's separate to the ERGS concession piece. At the moment, we're on track for that end of June deadline. How we got to this state with the backlog, and also what we do in future with the concessions arrangements in Victoria, is the subject of analyses that we want to commence as quickly as possible. Again, using fora such as this, we'll actually be taking a range of inputs into that to work out what is the best mechanism to support vulnerable Victorians. And that's a review that will be led by the policy part of our department. I won't comment on its scope, not my role to. I'm part of the operations part. Kate, I'm happy to take any questions or further feedback on, or questions, and even if they're on notice from this group. I know this is a big issue.
Thanks for your willingness, Gordon, and for those reflections and responses. I wonder, I'm not sure if anyone wants the ability just to put up their hand or raise anything else while Gordon's talking about ERGS before we move on to the next part on the agenda.
Okay, it's Jared here. I might just say thank you, Gordon, for that update. And I should have said that we have been in touch with your colleagues, and it has been helpful for them to receive those referrals. So thank you for that. I think that for me, one of the lessons in this is around effective communication, and you know, regulators would be really interested in that as well. The feedback we got from people, you know, the government insignia on the letter, people think automatically it's a court sort of document, and that kind of scares them, if that makes sense. And you know, and most people that contact us, not everyone, but most people, you know, simply are non-English speakers, so they can't engage with the content of the letter. So I think that's a very interesting lesson when we're kind of designing communications, particularly for vulnerable groups, and thinking about what we can learn from that incident.
Thanks, Jared. I wonder if there's any other queries for Gordon. We're very happy to take those questions on notice too and feed them back to Gordon at DHHS, if that's all right, Gordon. Yep, great. Thanks very much. Thank you. Let's move to part 4 of the agenda then today. We just wanted to do a deep dive on one of the pivotal issues we've all been talking about throughout this entire phase, which is disconnections. So I know disconnection was flagged at the last roundtable as an issue that should definitely be tracked, and we've heard your concern about disconnections and restrictions being continued through this crisis and the impact this has on consumers. And we've heard that calls coming to your services indicated that retailers were still threatening or carrying out disconnections, and that in some cases this related to issues in how the payment difficulty framework was being applied. So there were calls for a moratorium on disconnections, balanced with issues of managing debt levels for both consumers and businesses. We're aware that disconnections are continuing to be requested and processed, and the numbers show that there are over 1,000 requests to disconnect Victorians for not paying their electricity bill since late March. some of you might be aware that Commissioner Centre
So I think we've had Kate just drop out for a second there again. So it looks like our connection difficulties are continuing a little bit. And the team have asked me to see if I can pick up until Kate comes back on. So I'll see what I can do. So we're up to part 4 of the agenda. I wasn't quite prepared, which is part 4, which is, if someone could quickly help me out here, detailed discussion on disconnections. And I think what Kate was saying is the last roundtable, participants raised issues about consumers still being disconnected. And we'd like to explore this in more detail about what's happening on the ground from your perspective. So I guess I'll just open up. I'm hoping that people can hear me. I'm presuming you can. For discussion around what you're seeing around potentially consumers being disconnected, or maybe they're not. I'm happy for people to raise their hand maybe as a mechanism for starting the conversation. If we know how to raise your hand, it's raising your hands on the... I've got Jared. Off you go.
I was raising my hand in reality, sorry.
Well, you
the metaphorical raising my hand.
Well, so it's all good.
I think thanks for raising this issue and doing a bit of deep dive on it. I think there's a, I mean, in terms of our service, we've had some people talk to us about receiving, disconnection warnings or threats of disconnection. I'm not sure we've received any examples of actual disconnection in the last month. And Jake's on the call as well, so he might be able to add to what I'm saying. One of the things that we are interested in exploring, though, is we always know that, we know from our casework that some people are disconnected and end up being disconnected for some time, weeks, months even. And so what we'd like to see happen is for retailers to look back over the last 3 to 6 months at disconnections, and has anyone not been reconnected within a short period of time, that they haven't engaged in service assistance, and make sure that we haven't got people out there at the moment in sort of long-term disconnection situations. I doubt it's going to be a large group of people, but there'd be a very vulnerable group of people. Just to let you know, from our service last year, we encountered someone, an Aboriginal man in regional Victoria, who'd been disconnected from his gas for more than 6 months, and so he didn't have cooking at his home. So that's something that we're kind of keen to see if can be explored. And just I think we talked last time, we're continuing to advocate for I guess a public moratorium on disconnections, really to give that sort of clear messaging and enable the particularly community workers at the front line being able to clearly communicate with people about what their rights and entitlements are. We think that would really help and boost a bit of confidence. We are hearing challenges people are having in making contact with essential service providers, including utility companies, or I actually had one of my staff tell me that people are waiting 4 hours on the phone at the moment to speak to Telstra, but I suspect there are large delays with energy companies as well. So requiring people to call to access assistance is not necessarily going to be the most effective option.
So is there anyone else who wants to add to that conversation? I see Kate's back. Do you want me to hand back the chairing to you, Kate? Or?
I got disconnected while I was talking about disconnections. I'm
happy to continue for this session if we want a bit of continuity, just in case you get kicked off again, Kate.
Yeah, sounds good.
Give you an opportunity to wrap things up. Gavin, I think I see you've got your hand up from Vinny's.
Yeah, thanks for that. I suppose whatever we do in the interim, providing people access to essential services now and off into the future, how we move forward within that space, given the debt load that these households will end up having. I note that other states have come to the party and have offered to meet some of those costs to keep people on supply, and how this might wash through to DMO and ultimately, or VDO I should say, and ultimately how those costs are allocated amongst the community, and then do we get a cascade going on? So I think looking at the challenges that we've got at the moment, the broader economic situation, and how we move through this to keep as many people whole as possible needs to be put into a continuum. So I'd be really interested to hear the Commission and other institutions' views on that.
We've got Jake. I'll hand over to you for your observations.
Thanks, John. I just wanted to add on with what Jared was saying. My understanding is that networks may have that information on people who have been disconnected for some time from the requests that they get through from retailers, and best oversight as to whether people are still offline. Ideally, there'd be some sort of welfare check for those people. And my understanding is that networks would have difficulty identifying and releasing that information without some form of information request from a regulator. So it seems like the ESC may have some ability to intervene there. And I'd also just add, my understanding is that there may be some protections for people from disconnection through the need for health and safety in the regulation for electricity, whereas I worry about gas, and really those ones we've seen with people offline for some time have been gas. The 2 or 3 that come to mind for me. People think they can rely on electricity, they end up going without hot water for a long period of time, which is obviously, and also in many households heating, which is really concerning.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jake. Did you want, I wonder, Sarah, did you want to comment on that health and safety observation?
Yes, I can. And I think, thank you for raising it in terms of where we can access data. Well, I'll speak on 2 points. One about the health and safety, and Jake, you're probably referring to some degree to the letter that we sent on Tuesday to industry. So just for context or background, a number of retailers and all Victorian electricity distributors were asking the Essential Services Commission to clarify its position in regards to disconnections during the pandemic. In response to that request for advice, we essentially referred the businesses to existing obligations that exist in our framework. And a key obligation within our framework is the payment difficulty framework. So reminding energy retailers that of their responsibilities under the payment difficulty framework, essentially to keep customers connected for those customers that are experiencing payment difficulties, and reiterating that disconnection is an act of last resort, so making it really clear to them. And that message was clear for both electricity and gas. However, our distribution code also does provide, and our gas system code also provides that, if energy companies energy distributors do receive requests from retailers, that they are required to action those requests when it comes to service orders, and service orders include disconnections. However, in the electricity distribution code, there are prohibitions on disconnection for certain circumstances, and that includes where there potentially could be any health or safety risk for any person. And in reflecting that obligation in the current circumstances, the Commission wrote to businesses noting that distributors should have regard to the current circumstances, and particularly stay-at-home, mandated stay-at-home periods when having regard to compliance with that obligation in the electricity distribution code. However, of course, we acknowledge the same provision doesn't exist in our gas system distribution code. So we're very mindful of that, and we'll certainly be looking at that closely going forward, particularly as we start to receive data going forward to understand the impact of COVID-19 on our market, on the customer experience. In terms of the data request, Jake, that you just mentioned in terms of getting data directly from distributors, in terms of how many customers have been off supply, let's say, for greater than 7 days, I think a lot of us would remember the good old indicator which talked about re-energisation within 7 business days. And when we were going through the payment difficulty framework process, there was a collective view that we should get rid of it because it didn't mean much at all. I think potentially it could be, I'm starting to believe that that was actually a useful indicator, and certainly would sort of talk to the circumstances that you've outlined, Jake. So thank you for raising it. We'll certainly consider it in the context of our data requests for distributors. I think it's a really, really good point. And Gavin, in terms of your reflections, and of course, please, commissioners or CEO, feel free to chime in. The reflections in relation to market resilience are certainly front, of our minds. Yes, keeping customers connected, is the key priority here. But ensuring, we have a resilient market that comes out at the end strong, and that it delivers competitive outcomes is certainly something that we are seeking to achieve, and it's what we're required to achieve under our legislation. So in any decision that the Commission makes, we have certainly regard to those objectives as well.
Yeah, can I just add to that? I think there's impacts on organisation like mine and other emergency relief agencies. So once you've got people loaded up in the payment difficulties framework and the debt's still there, then they reach out to our agencies to actually make up shortfalls, because that's how it's meant to be working. So what it does is it puts additional burdens on us and other third parties to keep everything whole. And so we're sort of saying, if we can, I'm sort of suggesting if we can think about this a little bit more holistically, the burden then gets shared, so we can then use our very scarce resources to all these other issues that are going to be appearing as well. So I'd just like, the Commission to think about how it all works through in the process. It doesn't magically just come off a bottom line of a retailer. People will approach us because if they've got a utility debt, they will have other debt as well. So they'll come to us for a suite of issues.
Thanks very much, Gavin. I wonder whether you touched on, while I was briefly offline, what sort of support mechanisms anybody is seeing in relation to retailers providing additional checks to ensure that a customer's engaged with them before there's been a request for disconnection by a retailer. Has anybody got any reflections or case studies that they've heard about retailers going beyond and adding a little bit more of a check and balance there before they take that step?
I think I've seen some work taking place through the Energy Charter. There is one of their initiatives there called, I think it's knock before disconnection, something along those lines, which AGIG has flagged that they will participate in. I believe it's copying a initiative from Essential in New South Wales, where they door knocked a household, I think several days ahead of a planned disconnection, and found that most of the time that intervention meant that the disconnection didn't take place through whatever means. So I wonder if that's at play at the moment. I didn't get an update on that today at the end user group for the Energy Charter, but it seems like a good initiative that would be good across the entire industry.
I guess the other question is, has anyone seen evidence of the distribution businesses offer around waiving the fixed part of that translated to anything in reality? I see Gavin.
No, they're still getting the B2B, and all the systems aren't sort of Apache and in getting together. Also, there's a lot of confusion within the retailers about what's in, what's not in. So I think the DBs did a good job of crafting a statement of intent, but the detail about how to operationalise that and deliver is still being worked through. And I'm sure that you're talking to your industry participants, so they'd be able to lift up more detail on that.
Yeah, they said that they were working it through it on a contractual basis with the retailers. So
and that
they admitted that it was still a work in progress when we had the conversation about it, and had worked through things like what happens with dispute resolution and how do you deal with them.
Yeah, and because of the bespoke approach, because of the multiple DBs, it's all a little bit different. Whereas you've got, one retailer across various jurisdictions and various networks with multiple bespoke arrangements, I think that adds an added level of complexity and possible not making it as seamless as it should be.
Thanks.
I'm wondering at this point if my fellow commissioners had a question on either disconnections or more generally. Satish, is there anything you'd like to pose to the group today?
Thanks, Kate. I just actually wanted a bit of clarification as to whether I've heard correctly. So please feel free to contribute to this, but I seem to be getting a message that there are many in the sector that are doing the right thing by consumers in terms of, or landlords in terms of rental issues that community groups are facing with. There doesn't seem to be too much sharp practice, not suggesting there isn't any, but it sounds like many have recognised the environment and are more or less towing the line. Is that a fair assessment of what I've heard today? Yep, Gavin's nodding. Thank you.
Thanks, Satish. Simon, did you have anything you wanted to ask the group today?
Yes, David, I think it was from Brotherhood St Lawrence, mentioned he'd seen data that household consumption was up 20%. I don't know, I'd seen that number. That seemed very high. Is that what other people are hearing as well?
Gemini's putting out those data sets. If you jump on LinkedIn with Gemini, you'll see it. I've also seen, I'll shoot you through a screenshot I took in a meeting with DBs the other day, if you like. I don't know whether I was meant to take the screenshot, which had all the DBs changes in consumption for CNI, SMEs and domestics. And it was all around 20% up for domestics and significant reductions for SMEs and CNIs. So overall demand is down, but that's the sort of the detail in that the change.
Yeah, that's pretty worrying, 20%. So thanks, Rebecca.
Rebecca, anything you'd like to share with the group today or ask?
No questions from me, but just to, I guess, follow on from Satesh's comments, and I think from the industry forum that we had last week, it is clear that a lot of the participants, both at the retailer and the distributor level, are all thinking together rapidly, figuring out how to address the current issues, and it's good to hear that we think that they are, the majority are doing the right thing at this point in time.
Just to, thanks, Rebecca. Just a knock-on question. It might have been covered while I was offline as well, but I'm just interested to understand, for those customers that have either have been or just recently been disconnected, what sort of arrears have those customers got, and what sort of customer is that? Is that someone who needs additional help because they've had language barriers in trying to engage, or what sort of cohorts of consumers are you seeing that have been subject to disconnections more recently? Are there any more general reflections on that? And tell me if you'd covered that off while I was offline.
Kate, I think the comment was that they hadn't been seeing any disconnections.
Right.
And that appears, is that correct? I had heard that, so I wasn't sure whether people would be able to answer that question, or is it that retailers have been trying to disconnect, but distributors haven't been disconnecting them, or does anyone have any views about? I thought I heard that, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, thanks.
So it's Jared here, and Jake, please jump in as well. I mean, we have had people talk to us about receiving disconnection warning notices or threats of disconnection, together with complaints about being asked to pay more than they can afford. I don't think we've seen anyone being actually disconnected. And we you know, from a consumer perspective, you don't know really whether the not disconnecting is because of an action of the distributor or not.
Yes, yes, and I think what will be very useful next week, Sarah, is that data collections. When all of that data starts flowing through, and we get more visibility of what's happening on a more regular basis with disconnections, we'll be able to have a little bit more insight about what that looks like, and whether it's the requests are being made but the disconnections are not being processed at all, or if there are other reasons that sit behind that. So
I've just got here the last clearly written out example of what the impact of a threat of disconnection. This one was somewhat earlier in the month. I think it was around the 10th of April this was sent to me. But someone called us. They'd been threatened with disconnection after not being billed correctly for some time. The outstanding debt was several $1,000s, and the person calling us was initially calling us to access their super in order to pay off the debt, because they had proposed a payment plan of $150 a week, which was quite generous given their income, and that had been rejected, and instead they'd been told that they must pay $1,500 up front. So we're still getting in those scenarios because of the threats of disconnection, and this is why we're really pushing for that moratorium, so we can say clearly you will not be disconnected and we can move this forward. People obviously trying to access their super in such scenarios are quite anxious, and it burns up a lot of our caseworkers' time just calming people down to get them to the point where they're confident there's a way through.
Yeah, thanks for that reflection, Jake. I was just wondering, Zach from EWOV, I know that you said that your complaints numbers were well down, but does that mean that you haven't seen many instances of complaints related of the type that Jake's just talked about, or engagement issues with PDF?
That's right. Credit issues generally, particularly the last couple of weeks, have actually been right down for us. So we've seen more sort of billing related complaints than PDF related, and certainly not a lot of connection related complaints.
Yeah.
At this stage, you know, like I keep saying, we're certainly expecting them
to come. Yes. Yeah. Does anybody from the group want to pose any questions on disconnections to continue this dialogue?
I was wondering, while I was listening, whether the cohort of people that might be coming into payment difficulties are maybe not so familiar with the support services of the people in this room than maybe previously, and that could be an indicator of why numbers are actually down, that some of those people who are more familiar with your support services are getting a bit more support at the moment, and therefore coping a bit better, but others are facing a shock and maybe not aware of the services in the same way. And I wonder whether that's something that you reflected on, or am I just on the left field here?
I think
Lauren here from CPRC. It's something we're really wanting to test through our consumer survey, exactly that point. So to see whether there are kind of emerging cohorts that previously were employed pre-COVID, for example, and have suddenly lost their job and are suddenly in a position where it's, you know, they are in difficulty and they're not familiar with those services. So we want to be testing kind of where they're going to access support, any barriers they're having with that support, and then doing a bit of cross comparison between different cohorts, so the new vulnerable and kind of the amplified vulnerable, if you like.
I was going to add that I think that sort of research is the way to answer that question, John. From a service provider's perspective, we don't know who doesn't call us. So I think that Lauren's approach and doing that sort of research will be really insightful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if we close off the discussion on disconnections now, if no one's got any other queries to pose, and just open up a more general set of issues that anyone would like to raise. But before I do that, I just again reiterate that the Commission's very intent on closely monitoring what's happening with disconnections, how many are being requested and processed, and the consumer experience in that sense, because of the payment plan issues you've raised, Jake, the disconnection warning notices that seem to still be going out. I think we'll be in a much better position over the next week and ongoing, just to understand exactly what is going on. So as Sarah said, we will share as much of that information as we can, so that we can all understand what's happening on the ground. So we're also keeping a very close dialogue with government, obviously, which is very important on this pivotal issue. So we'll continue to do so, and have really obviously an open mind to any steps that we may be able to take. So these discussions are extremely useful to understand, have a sense of the case studies and the consumer's experience at this point in time. So thank you, it's been very useful. I wonder, we've got about 15 minutes left. I was going to move on to a bit of a wrap up, but I think there's probably about another 10 minutes to go before I do so. I'm wondering if there's anything, when we've driven a lot of the questions today and the deep dive on disconnections, is there any other issues or aspects that anyone would like to raise in terms of an open question or a reflection? Feel free to raise your hand, yell out, add a chat in, and if not, maybe I can wrap up and we can close the session.
I was just going to add, and I think we've sent a complaint into the ESC, Jake has, just around some of the communication from energy retailers on their websites. Some of them, well, this one is still saying that, you know, assistance is on a case-by-case basis, rather than realising under the payment difficulty framework there is an entitlement to assistance. So we'd encourage you to kind of continue to look at how the energy retailers are, you know, explaining what this assistance is available to people.
Yes, thanks, Jared. I know that Anne's done a lot of work getting some visibility across every retailer by doing a deep dive, by talking to them, reviewing their website, so we can understand across the sector what those sort of any other mechanisms they're putting in place over and above PDF, but also the way they are communicating the framework itself. And maybe that's something you can take on notice in terms of the way in which those entitlements are expressed, to ensure that they're not misleading and that they accurately reflect what consumers are entitled to. Yeah, thanks, Jared. Simon, did you have your hand up for a moment? No, all good. Any other hand waving or unmuting? Well, on that basis, I think I might just add a few reflections and then wrap up and talk about some next steps as well. So, in terms of what I've heard today, some of the key themes, definitely seen and heard a reduced volume in consumers accessing support, with a couple of exceptions, but you're still expecting those calls for support to increase. So we've heard about the National Debt Hotline, Gerard, and the volumes that you're seeing come through. Potential reasons may be the use of temporary relief, job seeker, heard that, to pay their utility bills and increase risk to personal safety. Also heard that new cohorts of consumers seeking support include those with no income, migrant refugee communities, overseas students and reduced income, reduced work hours. Also heard about ERGs, and there's some continuing challenges. Thank you to Gordon today for reflecting on some of the DHHS changes and thought processes that are going on in the background as well. Those changes seem to be helping with some of the backlog, but some issues obviously remain, and it's no mean feat. I think we heard that effective communication in very simple terms is something that's really important for the cohorts of consumers that will be accessing and need to access those services. We've had a really interesting discussion about disconnections and the fact that consumers are still receiving those warnings about disconnection and perhaps being asked to pay more than they can afford for those payment plans. Also heard people who've been disconnected for some time are a small cohort but are at particular risk, in particular for gas and coming into winter as well. And proactive engagement, I guess, by businesses might help stop disconnections, and I think we will know more about that in the coming weeks. And obviously very alive to that issue. So those are the themes I've heard today, and it's been a very useful discussion just to have an update, which I think is 3 weeks since we last met. On that basis, I was going to flag that we perhaps set the next meeting for about 3 weeks' time as well, just to do a revisit of what's happening, to see what changes have occurred in that period of time. So I think I was going to flag that our next roundtable perhaps be held on the 21st of May. So hopefully that will suit everyone and give you enough time to get on with everything else that you need to in the meantime, but also be a timely sort of a touch base and point again to revisit all of these issues again. There's also a possibility that the Energy Minister will be available to attend the roundtable on the 21st of May. So I'll provide an update with you on whether that will come to fruition, but we're very hopeful. So I think that would be an excellent opportunity to engage with the Minister. So I think I might, on that point, wrap up today, but that's been a really valuable discussion. Thank you very much for your time. And there was one more thing I had to flag with you. Kat and Jess have a note here for me. They've also organised a webinar on better practice in the provision of family violence support. And that webinar will include expert speakers, including Alison McDonald, the CEO of Domestic Violence Victoria, Julie Kunn, CEO of WIRE, Women's Information and Referral Exchange, and that will give businesses the opportunity to discuss how to respond to and support consumers affected by family violence at this time in line with their regulatory obligations. So I just thought I'd mention that if you're interested in attending that webinar next week, please reach out to Jess or Kat as well in the meanwhile. All right, well, thank you very much everyone for your time today and your reflections. I apologise for noise of children in background and for me having some IT technical issues today, so thank you for your patience. Stay well, and I'm sure, I hope I will see you again on the 21st of May. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Kate.